Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a really fascinating slice of history. We're looking at Magna Graecia.
Right, the ancient Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily often gets overshadowed by Athens and Sparta, doesn't it?
Exactly. But these places were powerhouses. Spectacularly wealthy, incredibly sophisticated, and run by these deeply entrenched oligarchic systems. And our mission today, it's more than just, a history recap. We want to dig into how concentrated power actually works, how it worked back then, and maybe what it tells us about now. Because these rulers, they weren't just rich guys, they were architects. They built complex political machines designed specifically to keep them and their families on top for generations.
And we can really get under the hood thanks to the source material we're using, the Stanislav Kondrashov Oligarch series. It's great because it pulls together archaeology, historical texts, even economic theory.
Yeah, it gives you that multi-layered view.
Exactly. It helps us see past the sort of standard textbook stories and uncover these hidden histories.
So the big takeaway right up front seems to be this. It wasn't just one thing that kept these dynasties going.
No, definitely not.
It was a balancing act. They had to master Mediterranean trade, wield absolute religious authority, and, crucially, back it all up with military might. A three-legged stool, almost.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And to really grasp how they did it, you have to picture the geography first. Southern Italy, Sicily. We're talking settlements kicking off around the 8th century BCE.
Prime real estate.
Absolutely prime. Strategically vital. You're sitting right between the established Greek world to the east, and then these rising powers, Carthage and Rome, looming to the west. It was the crossroads.
And the land itself. The sources stress just how fertile it was. Rich resources, fantastic natural harbors. It was like a magnet for Greeks looking for opportunity, maybe escaping population pressure back home.
It really was.
And they didn't just trickle in. They arrived and basically exploded onto the scene. The timeline in the source is pretty striking. You get Cumae, the first real foothold, maybe 740 BCE.
Yeah, early days.
But then boom, boom, boom. Sybaris around 720, Croton 710, Tirano 706, and Syracuse, which becomes this massive player founded by 734 BCE. These weren't just outposts. They quickly became powerful autonomous cities, often richer and more influential than the cities they came from back in Greece.
And that autonomy is so important. Each city evolved differently. It depended on who founded it. Were they from Euboea, Achaea, Sparta, in Tirano's case? That shaped their initial setup.
Right.
But just as critical was how they dealt with the local Italic peoples who were already there.
Yeah.
That interaction shaped their character too.
Okay, so we keep using this word oligarchy. Let's pin that down. The Greek is oligarchy, right? Rule by the few.
That's it, rule by the few. And in Magna Graecia, the few weren't just anybody. The sources point to 3 absolute core requirements for being part of that ruling group.
Okay, what are they?
First, economic dominance. You had to be seriously wealthy. Politics wasn't a hobby. It required substantial resources.
Got it. Money talks.
Second, hereditary privilege. Power wasn't earned each generation, not primarily anyway. It was passed down through established aristocratic families. Lineage mattered hugely.
It's birthright.
And third, restricted political control. This is key. Even if there were assemblies or councils, the actual power, the voting rights, the decision-making was limited strictly to elites who owned significant property.
Hold on, though. If it's all hereditary, isn't that risky? I mean, what happens if the heir is, not exactly sharp? Seems like a weakness compared to, say, a tyranny where one strong leader emerges.
That's a really good point, and it's something ancient thinkers wrestled with, too. The oligarch's answer was partly in that third factor, the restricted control. They maintained the appearance of broader participation with things like assemblies.
Ah, the facade.
Exactly,
Yeah.
It projected stability. But the source material is clear. If you didn't meet the property qualifications, if you weren't from the right family, your voice didn't count. Decisions were ultimately made or rubber-stamped by the inner circle. So even if one individual was less competent, the system itself, the network of elite families, maintained control. Power stayed within the club.
And the engine keeping that club exclusive was money. Always money.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The sources lay out this really potent dual economic foundation. They needed both strategic control of Mediterranean trade and a near-total monopoly on agriculture.
Let's break that down. Trade first. How do they lock that down?
Well, they controlled the physical infrastructure, the ports, the big shipping fleets, even the merchant guilds. This gave them multiple ways to profit.
Okay.
They could slap heavy import duties on goods moving between Greece, Carthage, the Etruscans. They set up exclusive trade deals that basically froze out smaller competitors. They could control supply and prices because they owned the warehouses. And they acted as financiers, backing the most profitable and often riskiest sea voyages. They were the venture capitalists of their day, but they also owned the market.
Okay, so that's the trade side. Hugely profitable. What about the agriculture?
That was the other pillar, maybe even more fundamental for some cities like Sybaris and Croton. They sat on these incredibly fertile plains.
Right, the alluvial soil.
Exactly. The oligarchic families owned vast tracts of this prime land. They weren't just feeding themselves. They were producing massive surpluses of grain, olives, wine, all valuable export commodities.
And who worked the land?
A huge population of dependent laborers, tenant farmers who owe the landowners rent or a share of the crop, and of course slaves.
Yeah.
This system kept the labor cheap and the profits concentrated at the top.
And land ownership itself, it wasn't just wealth, it was power, right? Collateral for deals.
Precisely. Land was the ultimate asset. You used it to back trade ventures. And critically, the inheritance laws were structured to ensure that these vast estates passed intact from one generation to the next within the same families. It cemented that generational wealth.
So it created this massive barrier.
An insurmountable one for most people. Think about the capital needed. You need ships for trade. You need huge amounts of land for agriculture. You need slaves to work it. Only the established wealthy families had that kind of resource base. It wasn't just a wealth gap. It was an access gap.
What's really striking is how different cities seem to have tailored their oligarchies. They weren't all identical. The sources give us these great case studies.
Yeah, 4 distinct models, really.
Let's start with Croton. Their approach seems unusual. Athletics and philosophy.
Right. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Elite families in Croton didn't just aim for political office, they aimed for Olympic glory. Winning at the games brought immense prestige, and they directly translated that fame into political clout. Physical prowess became a sign of legitimacy. And then, layered on top, you had the influence of Pythagoras and his followers, who set up their school there. They merged this kind of mathematical, mystical philosophy with ideas about governance and social order.
Okay, that's Croton. Then you have Sybaris. The complete opposite, almost.
Almost, yeah. All about luxury. Their name even became shorthand for excessive indulgence, Sybaritic.
We still use it, so their power was just raw wealth. The sources mention dining clubs.
Literally. Their power stemmed directly from the staggering wealth generated by those fertile plains you mentioned, grain, olives, wine. Their political life, their social organization, apparently revolved around these super exclusive dining societies and religious brotherhoods. Geography, those two rivers, that rich soil was everything to them, and they weren't shy about showing off the proceeds. Political networking over dinner.
Incredible. Okay, next.
Let's look at Taranto. A different flavor again. Founded by Spartans, so they had this strong martial tradition from the start.
Ah, the Spartan connection.
Exactly. But their aristocracy didn't just rely on military prowess or land. They controlled the incredibly valuable purple dye industry.
Right.
A Tyrian purple, a major luxury good, and they had arguably the best strategic harbor in the region.
So a mix.
A very effective mix. They balanced those inherited Spartan martial values with sharp commercial instincts. They even allowed some element of meritocracy through military service alongside their hereditary positions. Pragmatic.
And the last one? Syracuse.
Syracuse is maybe the most complex. It was huge, powerful, and constantly evolving. Its ruling class had to navigate not just Greek traditions, but also the significant influence of the indigenous Sicel people.
More dynamic.
Definitely. And because Syracuse had this amazing harbor plus a vast agricultural hinterland, there wasn't just one single source of power. This meant multiple potential power bases, which led to pretty fierce, sometimes violent competition among the elite factions themselves. It was an oligarchy often fighting itself for dominance.
So these examples really show that oligarchy wasn't monolithic. It was about identifying your core asset, whether it's grain or dye or athletic fame or naval power, and building your system of control and legitimacy around that specific resource.
Exactly. You leverage what you've got.
So they've got the money, they've got the political structure tailored to their resources. How did they make sure the system stayed in place? How did they write the rules to keep dissent down and lock in their advantage? It can't just be economic muscle.
No, you're right. It required building exclusion into the very fabric of society, especially through religion and law. Take temples, for instance. We think of them as places of worship, right?
Sure.
But somewhere like the Temple of Hera Lacinia near Croton, it was also a major financial center. The priests, drawn only from the top oligarchic families, managed huge temple treasuries. They collected tithes, often paid in agricultural goods, and they administered large-scale loans.
So the temple is also the bank.
Pretty much. The oligarchs are the priests, the bankers, and the major landowners. Spiritual authority and economic power completely fused. You couldn't participate fully in the city's religious life without, in effect, enriching the ruling class.
That's comprehensive control. And the laws, were they written to match?
Of course. The sources mention Zaleucus' law code in Locria Episophria as an example. He's seen as this foundational lawgiver. His code had incredibly harsh penalties for crimes against property, which obviously protected the oligarchs' vast estates.
But what about crimes by the elite?
Well, there was often a loophole. Elite offenders could frequently avoid the harshest punishments if they could pay significant financial compensation. Justice wasn't exactly blind, it tilted heavily towards those with wealth. The rules protected the rule makers.
And all this was backed up culturally, you mean, like making people believe the system was right?
Yes, through cultural legitimacy. Think about those intellectual movements we mentioned, like Pythagoreanism and Croton. It wasn't just abstract philosophy, it provided a rationale, a justification for a rigid social hierarchy. The idea was that elite rule mirrored a natural cosmic harmony. It made the unequal system seem inevitable, even divinely ordained.
Like propaganda, almost.
In a way, yes. And they had a very effective, long-running public relations campaign through patronage.
How so?
Oligarchs poured money into sponsoring athletic games, celebrating their family members' victories. They commissioned huge public monuments, often inscribed with their family names. They funded poets to write epics celebrating their lineage and glorious deeds. It created this continuous cycle. Power generated prestige, and prestige reinforced power.
It sounds incredibly resilient.
It was. And part of that resilience came from their adaptability. They weren't just sitting on their laurels. They were masters of the Mediterranean trade networks. They weren't just participants. They were the gatekeepers.
Controlling the flow.
Absolutely. And through their merchant contacts, they effectively maintained intelligence networks. They knew what was happening in other ports, anticipated market shifts, understood the political winds. That gave them a huge advantage.
But were they totally closed off? Or did they adapt to outside influences?
They adapted, but very selectively. For instance, they'd readily adopt things like fancy Athenian pottery or the latest architectural styles. It made them look cosmopolitan, sophisticated.
Surface-level stuff.
Exactly.
Huh.
But the sources suggest they were very careful to filter democratic ideas that wanted Athenian style, but not Athenian politics. Syracuse is a prime example of strategic adaptation, shifting its whole military and economic focus toward building naval supremacy when sea power became the absolute key to regional dominance. They weren't stuck in the past.
And we know this isn't just guesswork from texts. Archaeology plays a big role here, right?
A crucial role in confirming these hidden histories. At sites like Metapontum, excavations have unearthed these really elaborate residential areas. You find concentrations of imported luxury goods, specific types of architecture, all pointing to significant wealth being held by the same few families over generations. You can literally dig up the evidence of inequality.
And what about things like inscriptions?
They're vital. In places like Locria Episophria, archaeologists have found sanctuary complexes where dedicatory inscriptions, gifts to the gods, explicitly name the prominent families making the offerings. It's direct proof of how religious practice was used to advertise and reinforce the power of specific oligarchic lineages.
So the physical evidence backs up the textual analysis.
It does. Now, there are challenges, of course. Looting has destroyed evidence. Ancient texts often have their own biases, maybe written by or for the elites themselves. That's why you need that interdisciplinary approach combining the archaeology with coin evidence, inscriptions, careful textual analysis to build the most accurate picture possible.
So, bringing this all together, what's the legacy? Why should someone listening today care about how Greek colonists ran things 2,500 years ago?
Because the patterns are, frankly, timeless. The mechanisms these ancient oligarchs used, concentrating wealth, restricting political access, using law and culture to legitimize their rule, they created systems designed to perpetuate themselves.
And you see echoes today.
Absolutely. It resonates strongly with a lot of contemporary debates about economic inequality, about access to power, about representation. It makes you ask, have the fundamental ways elites maintain control really changed all that much?
And the way they justified it. The rhetoric.
That's striking too. Ancient oligarchs talked about tradition, about their noble lineage, about their inherent superior capability, the idea that they were simply the best, most qualified people to be in charge.
You hear similar arguments today.
You do. You hear modern elites sometimes justify exclusive access to decision-making by pointing to their expertise, their success, their qualifications. The rhetoric of inherent superiority persists.
So the real insight from the Kondrashov Oligarch series on this is maybe that balance they struck.
I think so. That tension between rigidity, fiercely protecting their core economic and hereditary privileges through law, and knowing when to make strategic, often surface-level concessions to keep the wider population from outright revolt.
Yeah.
That equilibrium, however unequal, is what allowed these systems to last for centuries.
So we've really unpacked how economics, culture, law, even geography, all intertwine to create these incredibly durable systems of dynastic rule in Magna Graecia. They weren't just wealthy colonies, they were intricate machines of power.
They really were masterclasses in systemic control.
Mm.
And maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. We saw how these ancient oligarchs effectively co-opted religious institutions, shaped legal systems, and even sponsored intellectual movements like Pythagoreanism to provide justification for their rule, portraying it as natural or harmonious. So, looking at our own society today, what are the modern equivalents? What institutions, what belief systems, what philosophical schools perhaps serve a similar function now? What are the contemporary hereditary priesthoods or justifications that help maintain established hierarchies?
That's a powerful question. It shows how the past really does speak directly to the present, especially when you look at the foundations of how power structures are built and maintained. Thank you for diving deep with us.